Hey guys, I'm Matthew, your VB tutor. Look, I love tinkering with AI as much as the next guy, but I wanted to test some AI integration without providing my credit card details and having no idea how many tokens I'll be tinkering with. That's where Groq AI comes in. Groq gives you 30 free requests per minute, way more than enough for us Excel nerds who are just learning to integrate AI into our VBA applications. And today I'm going to show you exactly how to get your free API key, build a VBA function that lets you send messages to the API, handle JSON responses, and fine-tune the AI to respond exactly how you want it to, all without spending a single cent. And if all these acronyms are new to you and scaring you, don't worry, I'm going to explain everything along the way. Now I know what you're thinking, Matthew, this sounds too good to be true. What's the catch? Well, for once, there isn't one. No trials, no credit cards, nothing. It just works. So if you've ever wanted to make AI work in Excel, tinker with APIs, or build your own Excel chatbot without paying for every request, then stick around, this one's for you. So if you're new to all this, then here's a short summary of what's coming up. First, we're going to sign up and get ourselves an API key. But what is an API? An API is an application programming interface. The application here refers to any software with a distinct function. In the case of this video, is going to be Groq. And the interface refers to the method that we're going to be taking advantage of to talk with the application. We talk with APIs using a thing called endpoints. These are basically just a URL that we access and we give it some extra information when we make the request. Now, what's an API key? Well, Groq needs to know who is requesting this information. And the API key is essentially just a string that's linked to your Groq account so that we can tell Groq that it's you sending the request. So let's go get ourselves an API key. So let's head over to groq.com. That's Groq. Here we'll go to developers, free API key, and then we press the login button. Here we'll create our free account. You can sign up with Google or GitHub. If you choose to sign up with email, just be aware that they may prevent the use of Outlook.com emails. If that's all you have, then just quickly make yourself a Google account. Once you log in, you should land on the API keys page, but if you don't, then just click API keys up here. And then in here, we'll just select create API key. It'll ask you to give it a name. This can be literally whatever you want. I'll just call this VBA app. Verify you're a human, press submit, and you'll be presented with your API key. This long string of gibberish is how we'll tell Groq who we are when we're sending our requests from VBA. Make sure to copy this now as it'll only be displayed once. If your workbook isn't already set up, then just paste it into a notepad file. I'm just going to put this in my notepad file here. Great, so that's all you really need from here, as I'll be walking you through the rest of it in Excel. But I'll just quickly show you around in case you want to try something that I haven't covered. So first is the playground. You can think of this like your web-based chat box for Groq. You can select all different types of AI models up here for the chat to use. These are also the models that we can access from our code. Now keep in mind that this chatbot doesn't keep a log of your conversations, so once you navigate away from the page, your chat is gone. Then the dashboard is going to show you metrics, usage, logs for all of your API calls, showing how many tokens you're using and when you're using them. The limits section here is quite an important one. Here you can see a list of all the chat models available to you with their respective request and token limits. So what are requests and tokens? Well, requests are basically just a single interaction with the AI, essentially one turn where you send a prompt and you receive a response. Tokens are a bit more confusing. They're kind of like the building blocks of a request. A token can be short as a single character or as long as a whole word. For example, a request saying AI is amazing could be about 4 tokens split up like this. In very simple terms, you can think that each word is around 1 to 2 tokens. For basic interactions, your request limit is definitely going to be more relevant. If you start getting more advanced, then token limits are likely going to become more of your limitation. So moving on from here, we can have a look at the documentation page. There's a lot of important information here, and if you're interested, feel free to have a look through. But for now, we're just going to jump to the API reference tab, and this is where we're going to get our endpoint information we need for our VBA application. For now, all we need to do is grab this URL here, and I'm just going to paste that into my notepad file as well. Before jumping back into Excel, we're also going to need a way of handling JSON values in VBA. I'll explain exactly what JSON is when we start building things out in VBA a bit more. But for now, we'll head over to GitHub to grab the JsonConverter module. Huge props to Tim Hall for his contribution to the VBA community. This is probably my most used library item in VBA. The link for this will be in the description down below. So just come here, click on JsonConverter.bas and click on this button to download the raw file and then save that in a relevant location, and then we're done. Alright, so we're done on the website, so now we can just jump back into our familiar Excel environment. First, we're obviously going to head into the Visual Basic environment, and then we'll add a new module, which I'm just going to call mod Groq. Then we need to import that JsonConverter module. So we'll just right click somewhere here, go to import file, browse to the location, and open that JSON converter. The last thing we'll need is a reference to the Microsoft scripting runtime for this JSON converter to run properly. So we'll go to Tools, References, and then we just scroll down until we find Microsoft scripting runtime. Tick that and press OK. Now in our Groq module, first thing we're going to need is a couple of private constants. So I'm going to create private constant API key as string. I'm going to set this equal to the API key that we grabbed from the website. Then we'll also have a private constant API endpoint as a string again, and we'll set this equal to that URL. Just keep in mind that this URL isn't actually account specific, so you can just copy it down from me. So now we're going to create the function that we're actually going to use to send our request and return a response. I will make this a public function called sendRequest, which will accept the user message as by-val user message, a string, and that's going to return a string value. So the first thing we need to do is declare a few variables. So we'll dimension dim HTTP as object, payload as a string, message list as a new collection, user message dict as a new dictionary, and lastly a payload dict as a new dictionary as well. I'll quickly go through building the payload and then explain exactly what we've done. So to our user message dictionary, we'll add a role, which is user. And then we'll also add content, which is going to be the user message, which is the variable that we've passed into the function. And then to our message list collection, we're just going to add that dictionary as an object. Next, with our payload dictionary, we're going to add a model. The model that we're going to be using for this video is going to be the Llama 3.3-70B versatile model. So I'll just grab this from the limits page of the Groq website just here. Any of these are available to you, just with their obviously different limits. And then again to the payload dictionary, we're going to add a messages item here, which is just going to be our message list. And finally, we'll set the payload string equal to JsonConverter dot convert to JSON and pass in the payload dictionary. And we'll also set the white space value to 2. All right, so here I'm just going to debug.print the payload variable, and we'll create a quick test function. So just subtest, and we'll do send request. And not that it matters at the moment, but I'll just ask it now, what is VBA? So now if we run that, we'll just see what we've actually built here. So this here is a structured JSON string, and this is what we're going to be sending to the API. So I'll divert here quickly to briefly explain what JSON is. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation, and basically it's a lightweight format for storing and transporting data. It's most commonly used when we're sending data to or from a web page. It's reasonably straightforward to understand. You have keys and paired values. Values can be plain text, they can be numbers, or they can be dictionaries and collections themselves. JSON identifies dictionaries with curly braces and collections with the square brackets. The white space value that we pass to the JSON converter just makes it so that when we view the string like this, it's got this nice sort of indentation. If we remove that and run the test routine again, you can see we still get all the same information, but it's just not formatted quite as nicely. So we'll just put that back in. When you send the information to a website, it doesn't matter whether it's like this or like this. It's just this way is easier for us as developers to see what we're actually building. Now, the reason that messages is in a collection and not just here by a dictionary by itself is because we can actually add many messages to our system. But I'll demonstrate that a bit later on when we start fine-tuning our responses. So I'm just going to comment that payload out. And then now we'll need to just set our HTTP object to create object. And that's going to be msxml2.xml_http. I'll just give us some space to work with here. And we're going to be doing a few things with this HTTP object. So I'll just use with HTTP and close that off. So the first thing in here that we're going to do is open, and we'll open this as a post request. Post just means that we're going to be sending information to the HTTP object, not just retrieving it. The next parameter is going to be our API endpoint constant, which we declared up here. And then third variable is going to be false. This is just going to make our request non-asynchronous. Then we need to tell Groq what we want and who we are. So we need to add 2 request headers using set request header. First is going to be content-type, and that value will be application/JSON. The next is going to be our authorization, and the value for that is going to be bearer, and then have a space here before you close off the quotes, and then we just append the API key constant to that. And last, all we have to do is do send payload. Now, payload is the payload variable that we've created, which has this information in it. And so at this point, you've actually sent the request off to Groq and has provided it back its response. Your response is actually stored in the response text component of the HTTP object. So we can have a look at that by just going debug.print and doing response text, like so. So I'll just clear this out of here. And now if we run this routine again, I spelled response properly, response text. We run that request again. You can see this is our response that we've got back from the API. It looks like a whole bunch of random kind of information at the moment, but you can see that our information is here in the content. This is what the response is. VBA, Visual Basic for Applications. VBA is a programming language, blah, blah, blah. So let's clean this up a bit so we can actually take a proper look at it. So we're going to use the JSON converter twice here. So we use JSON converter. We're going to pass this JSON. This basically makes it a dictionary object first, and then we're going to convert that back to a string. So JSON converter dot convert to JSON, and then we're just going to give it that white space value so that we can read things properly. So we'll run that test routine again. Now you can see we've got a whole bunch of different items here in our response. We can see which model was used. We can see how many tokens our prompt used, how many tokens our completion used. You'll notice that we've got quite a few more tokens in our prompt than what you would expect from something like this small request. That's basically because the entire JSON payload, that whole JSON string, is what the tokens are calculated on, not just the prompt itself. So then what we need to do is get this information here for the message content and pass that back to our send request. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing we're going to need is a couple more variables. So we're going to have a response string, and we're going to have a response dictionary. So we're just going to remove all this and set our response equal to the response text from the HTTP object. Next, we need to check what the status of our HTTP request is. So we do if http.status equals 200. 200 basically means that the request was successful. Then request successful, else the request failed. In here for if the request failed, I'm just going to add a quick message box to state error, do a new VB line, and then we just pass in the response. That just gives the user a bit of information. It's not perfect, but it'll do for the purpose of this demonstration. Then if the request was successful, we need to double check that what we're receiving is actually what we're expecting. So we're going to first just wrap our next bit of code in on error, resume next, and on error, go to 0. Inside that, we'll set the response dictionary equals to the JsonConverter dot parse JSON, and then we just pass the response string. Now you can see in here the general path that we're going to need to take to access our message, our response. First is going to be inside the choices item. Inside choices, you remember the square brackets means it's a collection, so we have a collection of items. We only have one item in here, and for any basic request, all you're going to have is one item. So we can reference the first item, then we reference the message component, and then the content component. So to get that, we're going to set the send request, so the output of our function is going to be equal to the response dict, and then we have the choices, the first item in that, message, and content. And that's it. That's our entire function done. So here we can try now if we debug.print and just call the send request with our prompt. We'll clear that out, and if we run that, you can see there's our information in plain text. There's our response that we've got back from the API. So just to prove the point, if we delete that and we can change this prompt, we can say list 3 fun facts about VBA. We run that. There you go. We got 3 fun facts about VBA. So to make this a bit more useful, let's really quick just create a simple form to handle sending the request and getting the response. So it's a bit more fun to play with. So what we're going to do here is create a new user form, make this a little bit bigger. I'll create a label. This is just going to be our prompt. Then we have an input box. This is going to be where the user inputs their prompt information. So we're going to set the multi-line variable to true. We're going to make sure the scroll bars are vertical and word wrap is set to true. I'm just going to rename that text box to text prompt. And we'll add a button in here to button get response. I'll just say get response for that. And we'll copy that text box down, make this a bit bigger. We'll call that text response. And I'm just going to set the locked value of that to true. I think I changed that. That's our very simple basic form. So let's just add some code to make sure that it works. So in here, we'll just double click on the get response button. We just want to make sure that the user's actually provided us with a prompt. Otherwise, we might have an error when we send something off to the API. So we'll do if text prompt.text equals nothing, then we can just exit the sub. And then to get our response, all we need to do is set the text of our response equal to, and we reference the mod Groq module, send request, and then we just pass in the prompt text for that. And that's it. That's all we need to do. So now we can run that user form, and let's have a quick look. So we can do what is VBA, get response, and there you have it. Now you've got a form that'll work as your own little basic sort of AI prompt tool. This is obviously very basic and is an example of how you can use this, but there's so many different ways that you could utilize the AI in Excel. You get it to write formulas or even some VBA code for you, or analyze data, provide data insights, and so many more things. Now, what if we want to actually force our responses to come back a certain way? Well, remember how I said you can pass lots of messages to the AI? So let me show you what I mean. So let's jump back into our Groq module. And now when we added the user message, we set the role to user. This kind of implies that there's other roles too, right? Well, there's actually 4 different types of messages that Groq will accept. They have user messages, system messages, assistant messages, and tool messages. The latter 2 I won't cover today, but the system messages are an additional one that we want to work with. System messages are an instruction that's given to the AI before the user interaction begins. It helps define the AI's behavior, personality, or role for the interaction. So you could write a system message that says, "You are a code writing bot," or "You provide only the absolute minimum response needed," or any number of system messages. You can have 100 different system messages if you like. These messages tell the AI how to respond. The user can define this themselves, but if you want to make the tool tailored to a specific purpose, then the system messages are a great way to achieve that. Keep in mind that user messages can still override the system messages if they're explicit enough, but the system messages strongly influence the AI's behavior. So to add in a system message, let's create another dictionary for system message dict as a new dictionary. Then with this dictionary, we add the role. We set the role to system. And then we add what the actual system message is. For the purpose of the demonstration, let's say we want to respond in Old English. And then all we need to do is add that to our messages list collection. Sys message dictionary. And that's it. That's all you need to do. You could add 100 different messages here if you liked, but we'll just keep it simple. So now let's have a look at our user form, and we'll use our same prompt. So what is VBA? And you can see there, it's got a nice little twist of Old English to the response. So as I said, if you're explicit enough in your user message, we can still override that behavior. So if we add in here, only respond in modern English, and we do our response, then it's back to regular English again. So try this out for yourself, because doing is learning. Have some fun with it, and let me know in the comments how you think you could use this AI tool for yourself. If you like the content, please like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy your AI endeavors. This is your VB Tutor signing out.